Hey everyone, how you doing? Particularly you, Ben. Listen, at For Community, it's awesome to see that some people want to excel in their communication skills. And one person in particular would like to know how to write an expositional sermon, an expositional message. And for a long while, this was kind of my bread and butter as a pastor, I suppose. So I'm just going to share with you how to write an expositional message. And so if you want to know the nuts and bolts about how a sermon is created, this is a brief overview, a rough idea about how it happens. And in particular, this one really is for Ben, because a guy from For Community named Ben wants me to help him do this, and I thought I would take the opportunity to help you along with him. So it's awesome. So everybody thank Ben. So you're learning how to do an expositional sermon, or supplementing your learning anyways, because of our friend Ben. Yay, Ben, you rock. Okay, so here we go. Number one, choose a text. Of course, choose a text. Expositional sermons are based on the Bible, and it's a method. The exposition type of style of sermonizing is a method of how to allow the text to speak for itself. It doesn't really, honestly, because it's our opinion that's going into the text. Like I'm bringing myself into the text, and I'm listening to how the text is affecting me, and hopefully, as it affects me, I also have you, the audience, in mind, and I'll deliver something that sort of is my interpretation of what I think applies to you as well. So choose a text. There's a couple of ways you can do this. You can work through a book, or you can find something that you want to talk about. There are benefits to both ways. If you're looking at longevity in ministry, if you want to spend a long time in a church as a pastor or in a small group, and you just want to keep the relationship going, you probably want to go book by book, because the stress comes off of you about trying to figure out what you're going to preach next Sunday, what you're going to talk about at the next group. So getting into a book, trust me, with all the other things that pastors have on their plate and need to do through the week, an exposition series through a book is awesome, because a pastor doesn't have to fret about finding that perfect text for the next Sunday. God works through administration, so it's okay to plan your sermon series out. So you can go through a book, or you can find something that you want to talk about if your church or if your group that you're ministering to, serving, if there's something unique or specific that's going on to them, then just go to a text that you feel is appropriate to them. Let me tell you that working through a book and going passage by passage through a book will force you, the communicator of the Bible, to deal with passages that you wouldn't typically deal with, because we all have our hobby horses that we like to jump on. If I were to preach about stuff that only I wanted to preach about that interests me, I'd be preaching about evangelism all the time. Or whatever. But for me, when I choose a book and go through the book, it forces me to deal with the issues that the text presents, issues that I may not want to deal with otherwise. And of course, if you just stay there, though, and you're not flexible enough to actually get out of that and go to a topical approach where you find texts that match your context, you're going to miss something out there as well. So blending of the both is good. Lean into the going through an entire book, going book by book. Lead into that, and just be flexible enough that when other things come up, just switch to verses, switch to passages that are relevant for that moment. Okay, so that's how you find a text. So choose a text. Then you know what? I will pray over that text. I will never open my Bible to a text the day I have to do a sermon. The sermon starts at least the night before, the day before. I'll open up the Bible. I'll be reading through it, so my study days have been on Thursday. I'll open up the text on Wednesday. I'll be reading through the text a couple of times. I'll be praying through the text, and I'm going to bed looking, listening, thinking about the text. So when I wake up, it's already in my heart. God's already saying something. I'm already thinking about how it applies to me, how it might apply to you. Okay, so don't start this on whatever your study day is. Start this the day before your study day. A really great study day, a really great day, and this is going to take you 8 to 12 hours at least when you're doing this style of sermons. You want to be coming at it with the text already in there. You don't want to be coming at this cold in your study day, okay? So next, when you have your text, number 2, you need to be asking what's the subject, okay? So what What is this text fundamentally about? So John 3:16, God so loved the world, gave his only son, whoever believes won't perish, have eternal life. What is the text fundamentally about? What's the subject? You may say love. You may say God's love. You may say whoever believes. This is about believing. You may say eternal life. Whatever, it's fine. It's your opinion. It's okay. Whatever you think the subject is, then type it in. So subject. So I'm just going to say God's love for the world. Okay, I'll just mess up my notes here and put that in there. Okay, so after you figure out what the subject line is, you go theme. What is unique about this subject? How is it uniquely applied? Okay, so John 3:16, God's love for the world. How's it uniquely applied? Well, we receive God's love through faith in Jesus. So let's talk about through faith in Jesus. I'll say that, okay? So I've got something which is my opinion about what the subject of the text is, and I've got something about my opinion about what I believe the theme is, the bent, the motivation, the angle of the text is taking me in. So John 3:16, it's about God loving the world. And what's the theme? The theme, it sounds like it's a faith theme, that you got to place your faith in Jesus. Okay, so proposition. Which is number 4. How do you get to the proposition? What is the proposition? Proposition is like a thesis. When you're writing an essay for school, you will have the thesis typically within the first paragraph, maybe the last sentence of the first paragraph. Like we learned in high school. Even now in graduate papers, it's first paragraph is usually long. First couple of paragraphs, my thesis is in there. It's the reason for the paper. It's the reason why people want to listen to you, why you're asking people to listen to you. It's the big idea, the big point that you want to make. How do you get to your thesis? How do you get to your proposition? What are you proposing? This is what I propose to talk about. This is what I propose the Bible is telling us, okay? Proposition. It's subject plus theme, and then polish it out into 5 words, okay? About roughly 5 words. So God's love for the world through faith in Jesus. So subject, God's love. Theme, put your faith in Jesus. God asks for your faith. Love asks for faith. Love is accepted because the faith kind of thing. Love is something you believe in. Maybe I'll say believe in love. Believe in love. That's not bad. So maybe the proposition that I'll use in my example is believe in love. So maybe with my expositional sermon, I'll come to the front of people and I'll say, this is what I want to talk to you about today. This is what I'm going to ask you to do. This is on my heart. This is what I feel that God is saying to you today. Today, I really feel like you need to believe in love. Now I'm going to unpack that for you, I would say, because we all define love differently. We're going to dig into this text, and we're going to just figure out what love means. We're going to figure out what it means to believe in that. And at the end of the day, we're going to figure out how this all ties into how God loves you so much and how you respond to God's love for you. Okay, something like that, right? Believe in love. So that's kind of what I might come up with. So proposition. This is the big idea that people will walk away with and tell others, this is what the pastor preached about today. Okay, that's what this is. And you want to keep it to about 5 words. Otherwise, it's not concise enough. You want this to be really concise, because this is what people are walking away with, right? This is what you're trying to get people to remember. Like most people won't remember a lot. Like by the time people leave a church or leave a gathering and they hit their cars or going to lunch, they totally forget the message anyways, right? So you want to keep it as concise and as memorable as possible. So why do sometimes pastors work really hard on making things memorizable, on making things short, on making sure all of their points start with the first letter? Why? They're trying to give you memory aids, because it's so frustrating when people just walk away after you've spent like 16, 20 hours on a message. It's so frustrating when people walk away and they don't even remember what the message is by the time they get to lunch. But don't worry, you know what? Because often I don't remember my message by the time I leave the church and get to lunch, and I'm the guy who preached it, okay? So it's quite normal. Don't beat yourself up about it, but that's why pastors put so much work into making things sound pretty, okay? And hamming it up and all about stage presence, because we're trying to get your attention, and we're trying to get you to listen. We're trying to keep your attention because our minds drift so quickly, okay? So it's a big idea. Keep it about 5 words. Remember, say one thing or nothing. Everything needs to be glued to this one thing. If you say, a lot of people come to that, and I've been guilty of this so many times too, coming to the pulpit, coming to that place of communication, and saying, and basically our sub-points, our points underneath the proposition are sermons of themselves. And almost, I could have preached some of my sermons over 3 weeks, but instead I crammed it into one moment at the pulpit, and I preached probably far longer than I should have. Try to remember this. You can say one thing or you say nothing. Okay, just one thing or nothing. Make sure all of your points tie back to the one thing. Believe in love. In our example here. Okay. Let's go to points. How do pastors get to the points? How do you get to your points? When you go to a passage, passages generally will break themselves up. There are natural breaks in most passages, not narrative. I'm talking about in the more teaching, the more didactic, like in the letters kind of passage in the Bible. They break up fairly naturally. Like God so loved the world. Okay, there's one. There's a natural break that He gave His only Son. There's another natural break that whoever believes will have eternal life. Won't perish, have eternal life. So whoever believes, that might be a natural break with two sub-points, have eternal life or perish. There are natural breaks in every passage. Just look through those natural breaks, and there's no science behind this one. Well, not really. I mean, there kind of is. I mean, it's just you're using language, right? So look for the natural breaks, and those become your points. Just add another point here. For each of those natural points, create a catch phrase, a catch sentence, a catchy sentence that'll stick and will point back to the proposition. So, like, for God so loved the world. Create a sentence about what you're about to talk about. It's sort of an explanational or motivational sentence about that. So believe in love is the proposition. Love is God. You could say that. Believe in love is believing in God. Something catchy. Love is God. That's not bad. So your first point, love is God. So believing in love is believing in God, because God is the ultimate shower of what love is. Because God loved the world, He sent Jesus. It's the ultimate demonstration of self-sacrifice. And I'm just preaching now here, but you get that. So for each of your points, after you've naturally broken up the text, think about a catchy phrase that summarizes each of the natural breaking points. And those catchy phrases which summarize the breaking points point back to the propositional statement. Remember, you can only say one thing. You're saying the same thing, just in two different angles. You're showing how your passage, shorter the better, by the way, unless we're talking about narrative, we're talking about how your passage supports the proposition, will bring people back to the main idea of the text. Then subpoints. So after you've got your 3 points where the text naturally breaks it apart, now this is where you start really writing content. So it's no longer about how to administrate the text, right? It's no longer about what your geography on your sermon is going to look like. Right now it's about where's the content, where's the meat, okay, where's the beef. So here's how you get that. For every one of your for every one of your points, you want these subpoints. You want to have an explanation in there. You're probably going to want to have a mini application in there. You may want a supporting verse. I'm going to ask you not to do that, but you may want a supporting verse. Occasionally that works. You may want an illustration there to break up the text. So for example, you would say love is God, maybe as your first point. The part of the text that you're taking that from, God so loved the world. And then the explanation would be, this is the greatest demonstration of love that we can see, and this greatest demonstration of love is coming from God. And the Bible says that God is love. So in that moment, you might want to draw in another text there. God is love. You might then you have an illustration. I had this illustration where I thought I knew what love was. I was wrong, and then God taught me what love was, and whatever your illustration happens to be, make it personal. This isn't about illustrations, how to make them great. This is about sermonizing. Okay, so every single point you're going to do that. So every main point is supported in about the same way. Say the text part, explain the text part, maybe add a mini application in there. Remember, tying back to the main proposition. Use some illustration to support the idea, and maybe find supporting verses, maybe. But remember, don't do that too often, because it ruins the exposition. Every time you bring a verse in, you've got to do a mini exposition on that verse so people can hear that in context. Because if you're preaching out of the book of Mark, and then you pull in like the Gospel of Matthew in there, things are going to get messed up. For example, if you're bringing in a teaching like the Sermon on the Mount from Matthew, and you're bringing into a sermon on Mark, it doesn't work right away because teaching in the Gospel of Mark is benign. Mark usually shows that Jesus is teaching a crowd when he's dealing with the unreceptive and waiting for the receptive people to come forward. So whenever you see in Mark something that says teaching, you know, okay, nothing special is going on here. Jesus is testing for receptivity and waiting for something to happen. Whereas in Matthew, it's very different. In Matthew, teaching is given meat and given context. We've got the Sermon on the Mount, right? And so you really want to be careful when you're bringing in verses into your messages. You want to make sure that we're not reading Matthew for Mark or Mark for Matthew, right? Okay. Anyways, every time you grab a verse and bring it into your expositional message, that verse needs a mini exposition all by itself. And that is exhausting, totally exhausting. So do that very infrequently. Otherwise, you risk people misunderstanding what one book is saying in favor of what another book wants to say, and you're imprinting one author onto another. Don't do that. Okay, so your explanations, they may involve commentaries and other sources. My explanations frequently involve commentaries. The commentary that I particularly like nowadays is NIV application commentary. I've also liked the Life Application Bible commentary. That is really, really easy to access material. Warren Wiersbe's got some great stuff like the B series. Whatever works for you. There are a ton. I've got a list of 10 academic quality authors commentaries that I like to go to. I haven't bought any of those. Thankfully, because I'm a student and I'm doing my graduate, I've got access to all of their stuff that I like to use. So anyways, so commentaries, this is where it goes into the explanation part of your subpoints. Let's talk about the conclusion. After you've done your points, after you've added the meat in there, the next place you want to go to is your conclusion, because you want to, after you know now what you're going to say, because you didn't before, you really write the sermon as you go through those subpoints. So then once you're done all the subpoints and they all make sense, then now you write the last part of the message, the conclusion, and you want to tie it back to the proposition, because now you know what you're going to say. You didn't know what you're going to say before you started, but now suddenly, now I know what the sermon is about. Now, you don't get the aha moment when you're writing a sermon until after you've done the subpoints and then after you've really added the meat, because you have no idea what you're talking about until after you figure out what you're talking about. So now you write the conclusion. You tie it back to the proposition with the ultimate call to action, or with some kind of huge application here. Maybe you bring it in with an illustration, or you bring it home with an illustration. You certainly restate the proposition here. When you're done that and you've got this nice little conclusion, and you are convinced that people are just going to run to the altar and give their lives to Jesus, and people are going to be healed and raised from the dead, and whatever it is that you've got in your mind that's going to happen. After you're done that conclusion, then you write the introduction, because you want your introduction to tie into your conclusion, so that by the time the listeners, as they're listening to your sermon, by the time they get to the conclusion, they have an aha moment, that's what he meant in the introduction. Yeah, well, how do you get that aha moment during the conclusion? That's what he meant. He was saying that the whole time. You do that by writing the conclusion first. And then after you've written the conclusion, then you go to the introduction. And in the introduction, you plant seeds in the introduction that will basically start to spring some ideas to life in people's minds. They can join you on this journey of text exploration, so that by the time you get to the conclusion, you're restating really what was in your introduction. So if you're using an illustration, the conclusion, start the illustration without resolving it. Leave it hanging a little bit. Start the illustration in the introduction and resolve it in the conclusion. That's one way that you can do that. Good illustrations are awesome ways to start a message. You really want to be connecting with the people. So the first time you get up to the platform, whether you have been a pastor in that church for 25 years or whether you're just a guest speaker, I guess, you want to be connecting with the people, because their heads and their hearts are far away from the Bible compared to you. They're certainly not ready to engage with that passage in the way that you're ready to engage with that passage. So what do you do about it? You start with a really great personal personal illustration. Okay. Also, you can try the me, you, God, you, we approach. I can't remember who I got this from. I think I got this from Stanley, Andy Stanley. I think I got this from Andy Stanley. Me, you, God, you, we. So start in the introduction with me. I say something about me. That's a personal illustration, something that I've just recently experienced, maybe. And then I say, you. Do you know what I'm talking about? Have you experienced the same thing that I have? When I say this and I say it hurts, or I feel it, or it makes me happy, do you have that same kind of reaction? Well, this is what God says about it. Then you bring the text in, okay? And then in conclusion, it's you and we. So in the conclusion, we go to you, because after the God point, that's the whole body of the sermon. Then it's you. This is what God's saying to you. This is what you need to do about. This is what the call to action is for you. Okay, and then we. Imagine if we were all doing this together. What impact could we have on our community if we were all doing this together? Okay, so you, me, God, you, we is a pretty good way of managing how you present the introduction, conclusion, and all that. Then we go to the TS, transitional statement. The transitional statement, very important. It's more important than you think it is, but it's just one sentence. So after you have stated your proposition, God is love, or believe in love. I think that's the illustrative one the example one that we came up with, believe in love. You now need to go from proposition into your 2, 3, 4 points in a way that feels good, in a way like we didn't just slam on the brakes and then quickly shift lanes and then jump us back up to 100 kilometers an hour kind of thing, right? It's we need an easy transition. So a transitional statement is the point here. Transitional statement moves the proposition from the proposition to the points by using a plural key word like things, as in 3 things to think about. Just make it creative, not like that. So believe in love. Is that what it? Yeah, believe in love. Listen, there are 3 ways that you need to believe in love that's so relevant. Something like 3 ways. That would be the plural keyword ways. That's pretty pathetic, but anyways, that's what the transitional statement. After you're done the transitional statement, in order to allow you for an easy transition from the proposition to the 3 points, then you're into the mini transitional statements. So in between each of your points, your big points, you need also another transition. You don't want to say, here's point 1, blam. Here's point 2, blam. Here's point 3, blam. That's really choppy, and that really takes... it impacts the listeners. There's listener fatigue. When you stop, say, okay, here's something else to think about. Here's something else to think about. Listener fatigue. Don't do that. Transitional statements to make it sound like, even though you got 3 or 4 points, just to make it sound like it's flowing a lot better, just put some transitional statements between your main points. Then polish the points. So you're not done yet. You've got your 3 points, but they probably suck. They probably don't sound very good. So you go back to your 3 main points, and then you dress them up a little bit. You make them all start with the letter P or something, or you make them all rhyme, or it's a 3-part sentence that like God is ... and then love ... for you. I don't know. I just made that up, right? But you can your whole sermon, the body of your sermon, could be just a growing sentence. That's one way to do it. Polish the subpoints then, so that they're easier for you to follow and for you to deliver. Remember, you're the one that needs to be standing up at the pulpit or wherever you're standing from, the choir stand, or memorizing this, however you want to do it. So those subpoints have to be meaningful for you and followable by you. So clean that up so that you can see it at a glance, okay? And then preach it to an empty room. When you write differently than you speak. The way that you communicate in print is different than the way that you communicate when you're speaking. You can't go in front of people with a written script and expect that to come across as a sermon. You'll just be reading it, and fine, if you want to read something, whatever. But that's not the context in which you're presenting to people, right? You're presenting to people as, I've got something to say to you. I'm your pastor or whatever. I'm a friend or whatever, and I just want to speak to you from my heart. Well, you don't speak to somebody from your heart if you're reading what you wrote, right? I'm speaking to you from my thoughts. I've thought this out. That's not what an expositional sermon really is. So you talk it out, and as you're talking it out, what you're going to notice is the stuff that you have on the paper, it doesn't speak very well. So you change it. You change what's on the paper so that it makes sense for you to speak it. So sometimes what you speak doesn't make a whole lot of sense on paper, and sometimes what's written on the paper doesn't make a whole lot of sense for you to say out loud, because it's just harsh, or just whatever. It lacks life and lacks meaning. So you change it so that your sermon then isn't designed to be a book and read by anybody else. Pastors do not like to share their sermons with anybody. Forget about asking for them, because they're not written to be shared. They're written with cues, and they're just huge cue cards almost, in order to let the pastor know this is the way I have to communicate this in an audible form. They're not written to be read by somebody. They're written with cues in it to tell the pastor or the communicator, this is now what I need to say and the emotion behind it, how I need to set my face. Do I need to be relaxed? Do I need to be energetic? Like it's all cues in there about presentation. So it's not meant to be read by anybody else. Polish the subpoints so they're easier for you to follow. Preach it to an empty room, and then find an audience, man, because it's your turn to go for it. In the next message, in the next video, I'm gonna talk about geography of a sermon. I'm gonna talk to you about how to set up your sermon and in how it needs to look on the page, because when you get in front of a crowd, that's a whole different ballgame, and your brain just works very, very differently. So in the next video, I'm going to talk about what the geography of your page looks like after you've done this work. Okay, so if you got any questions, if you need some help writing your first sermons or whatever, I love to connect with you on Zoom. I connect with people. I love doing this stuff. So if you need some help with your public speaking thing, and you think the expositional approach might be good for you, or just want some tips about how to public speak, reach out, tag me in your comment, and I'll connect with you either by replying to your questions, or I might even invite you to a Zoom call, depending on how busy I am. That's it. Okay, so if you haven't, by the way, connected with a community yet, please consider connecting with For Community, creating community spaces so you can connect with others and also with God. And that's it for me for now. See you later.